good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started and into the demo, I just wanted to give a brief overview of who DRI is. Decision Resources, Inc., otherwise known as DRI, are experienced ERP system consultants and Infor CloudSuite ERP experts. We were founded in 1978. In fact, last summer we celebrated our 40th anniversary. We've implemented CloudSuite over 300 times, and we have 60 and growing employees dedicated to CloudSuite. Furthermore, we are the largest CloudSuite ERP Gold Channel partner in the US. DRI has 4 physical office locations in the US, in Pittsburgh, Chicago, Wichita, and Austin. In addition to that, we have consultants located all across the US, from Seattle to Tampa. So regardless of where you're located, we should have a consultant nearby, and we do in fact have customers all across the US. Because today's webinar is process focused, I just wanted to give a brief highlight of what some DRI process manufacturers make. So we have customers who make everything from cookies and other baked goods, frozen food products, leavening agents, spices and sauces. And in terms of chemicals, we have customers who make cleaning products, synthetic resins, plastics materials, biotech chemicals, odor eliminators, and more. So that gives a quick overview of DRI and who we are and who we represent. Without further ado, Mike, if you want to take it away and go ahead and get into the demo.
Okay, welcome folks, thanks. My name is Mike. I'm a DRI employee, and what you're going to see today is a software offering, an ERP system from Infor. Infor is a pretty big company, 3rd largest enterprise software company in the world. And you're going to see an offering from Infor called Infor CloudSuite. And in particular, this offering is configured for process manufacturers. So this is a configuration of our solution that's called CloudSuite Process. And by the way, I don't use PowerPoint, so everything you're going to see from here forward is we're going to be in the software. And this is a screen that we're in the software with right now. And by the way you navigate in our application is typically through a series of home pages, or a user can build a home page and construct what he or she wants on the home page. So if I move down to, say, this product data management, I can display any types of metrics, charts, graphs, etc., and then menu links. So that's what I'm doing, using to sort of navigate through the ERP application. Now, what you're going to see, our focus today is on advanced planning and scheduling and demand management. But we're going to start off with just a couple minutes to tell you a little bit about what makes this offering particularly good for process manufacturers, and in particular for food and beverage and chemical. And this little diagram we use, we call it sort of the circle of life. And there's some things that stick out here. For example, at the top here, you see it says recipe or formula management. That's a little bit different than typical bill of materials that are used in discrete production environments. So there's a very strong, robust formula capability. There's also batch production capabilities that I'm going to show you a tiny bit about in a few minutes. That has to do with the unique requirements of process manufacturers as opposed to sort of industrial manufacturers. You also see that there's a built-in quality module that can be used to support initiatives like SQF. Okay, and there's other things in the system that oftentimes process or food companies have to deal with, promotional management and things of that nature. So we'll touch on some of these things today. And with that in mind, let me just show you a few detailed screens in the system. And what we'll do here is I'm going to open up a screen called Formula Concepts. And this is a screen we use to sort of explain some of the process manufacturing capabilities that we handle nicely. Any process-based solution should have a really good formula or sort of recipe management capability. And I'm using those terms synonymously, formula and recipe. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this is our primary formula screen. And then I could spend half an hour just on this screen, but I'll hit some highlights here. This is a formula that's used to make elbow macaroni. And you can kind of see here, I can have different versions of the formula, different revisions. When I move over to this tab, this is where I actually see the contents of the formula. And the formula there's capabilities in here to do scaling properly and to address specific gravity concerns and to do these kinds of things that typically if you're a process manufacturer, you have to sort of tweak and adjust formulations from time to time. Maybe maybe those adjustments are for new product development, or maybe that's in the midst of a production run when you have to deal with things like potency issues. But there's capabilities in the system to do things like this. Let's say I want to tweak this recipe. I can come over and say, well, I know I need more wheat, but right now all I want to change the sort of relative amount is on these two ingredients. So if I come up and say, really, I want to consider more wheat in my formula, and I want to hold some of the ingredients constant, when I hit this little recalc button, what that allows me to do is just affect the components in the formula that are relevant. And that's a small but representative example of what you should expect in a formulation capability. And again, I could spend a lot more time on there, but that's a kind of a simple example of how we handle formulas. I'll close out of that. And I'll mention this briefly. So formulas are prepared and at some point they can be rolled in to become sort of a standard bill of material for material planning, sort of the topic that we're dealing with today, and product costing. There's also something we handle called manufacturing specifications. That's what allows you to take a formula and apply manufacturing requirements like a routing and to do things like say, hey, when I run this product in this facility or in this location, maybe there's issues that make the manufacturing process a little bit different. So you can have multiple manufacturing specifications for any product that you produce. Now, when you look at this diagram, there's also this notion of, for many process manufacturers, there's a notion of what we call a split BOM requirement. And that means many process manufacturers are going to sort of build or mix or blend to a formula, and that the results of that might be an intermediate that when you produce that intermediate, you might end up with multiple finished goods. So in this case, I'm producing some kind of beverage that I ended up with 8-ounce and 16-ounce finished product. That's another thing our application is pretty good at. And here's an example of that. If I look and I'm drilling into a specific sort of batch production order now, and in this case, you can kind of see there's my batch job, and it's made up of this first row is an intermediate to produce bulk pasta, elbow pasta in mass, and then this same sort of batch order can be used to produce 2 finished goods. So that's an example of sort of production control in a process-based manufacturing company. Notice as I'm on the screen, there's other things here that are kind of handy. If I have to adjust the formulation, the recipe on this particular batch, I have a quick button to do that. I also have the ability to establish quality tests and safety-related requirements, because some of those things dictate how manufacturing might take place. If I go over to this tab, I can kind of see that this is the list of ingredients that have been called out from that formula. And again, as Kristen pointed out, we have abilities to handle allergens and kosher requirements. And we have abilities to make sure that you're consuming material on sort of a FIFO as opposed to FIFO basis. So there's expiration logic there. So there's things there to consider. The last thing I'll show you, and again, I'm just giving you kind of a high level idea of some of our process-based tools. Any good process-based ERP system will also handle product recall particularly well, and handle things like actual recalls versus mock recalls, because a lot of process companies have to sort of prove out that they can do a recall successfully and timely. So this is the kind of thing that you can do a forward or backward recall and see what kind of exposure you have based on these are products that are sort of suspicious, and over here I'm seeing data that says these are customer shipments that might be for product that is suspicious. And then you can also do things like communicate to the relevant parties, either customers or suppliers. It's a lot to unpack there, but that's just kind of a high level overview. So what we're going to move on now from sort of some of the things related to sort of process-based manufacturing. Now we're going to switch our focus more to advanced planning and scheduling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and move to a different home page, something I have called production planning. And here we're going to show you a little diagram with a little main screen we use to address this topic. Now, in our application, Infor CloudSuite, many years ago, we used an MRP algorithm, and many of you are familiar with MRP. It's a tried and true way of planning materials and capacity, but we've moved on from traditional MRP into sort of the topic du jour is APS. And for us, that stands for Advanced Planning and Scheduling. And there is a distinction there between planning and scheduling. In our system, the planning portion of the solution is designed to do things like quote delivery to your customers properly and to initiate ordering of raw materials and packaging supplies, and to initiate production runs, and to do rough cut capacity planning. The S in there, the scheduling, is the plant floor optimizer. It's the thing that Kristen mentioned before that you can deploy things to make sure that you're running product that has the same attributes or maybe the same allergen content back to back, so you can minimize changeover and things like that. So that's what the scheduler does. Now, another part of our solution, or other parts of our solution, are things like this. If I come down to where it says what if planning, we have a built-in tool to do simulation that allows you to sort of take a step back and evaluate your business based on changing conditions. Maybe a product line you're expecting to grow by 20%. You can simulate that in our ERP and then start making the appropriate business decisions. That might be things like adding another shift or running overtime or sourcing another supplier. There's also some P&L considerations that are part of this process as well. The other couple things we'll mention to you down here is statistical forecasting. That's part of our application that uses sort of the capabilities of the software to interpret past demand in order to project future demand. I'll show you that briefly. And then we'll also look at some of our SO&P planning tools, some nice tools there as well. So let's get into some of the details, and I'm going to switch over to a series of screens I already have preloaded. And you might find this interesting, but I'm going to start with an order entry screen. So in our system, what you're looking at right now is an order entry screen. Some of this might seem familiar. There's an internal sales order number. There's the customer's PO number. And I'll spare you the details, but what you're looking at here is an order for 500 cases of this elbow pasta. Now, when you look at this sort of on the surface, you can kind of see, the order is for 500 and we have 65 on hand, and our advanced material planning system is saying of those 65 that are on hand, all 65 are available for this particular order, this particular demand. So that's useful there. What's even more useful is this next button I'm going to click. And this goes to the idea that this is part of our solution that allows you to do delivery date promising at the time of order entry. So you can kind of see I have a couple dates here. I have a due date and a promise date. We can talk about the subtle differences between these, but this is sort of what you've committed to a customer, and maybe if they ask for something different, you have a different promise date. But in my case, these two dates are the same, but right alongside that, I see a projected date, and that's the date that the system thinks that you can deliver on. All right, and the way you can sort of dissect that date is hit this button that says Get CTP. That stands for Capable to Promise. And when I do that, it comes back and says, even though you'd like to ship on the 30th, the system is telling you really probably you're not going to be able to ship it until the 8th. Now, that's kind of handy information that some of our customers like their order entry folks to sort of have access to. You can restrict this as well, but many of our customers like this. Now, the next level is maybe more important and more compelling. If I hit this plan detail button, what the system is doing at this point is it's doing sort of a real-time MRP run to check the availability of all necessary resources. By that, I mean things like ingredients or chemical components or packaging and anything that drives capacity, and things like tooling, et cetera. It's all considered, and it's presented to you in sort of a Gantt chart view. Now, in this case, this oil that's needed for this product is it's in bold red, and that's telling you it is the constraint. And if you could somehow fix that problem, you might be able to deliver sooner. Now, we could go into a lot of details here. I'm going to move on at this point. But what you're seeing here, folks, and what we want you to be aware of, this is the kind of thing that if you get your data correct, you can actually do effective delivery date promising at the time of order entry. Okay, so let's move on for that. I might come back to that a little bit later. And let's start talking about some demand management tools that are available in our ERP system and things you should probably look for in any ERP system. So I'm going to pull up a screen now called Forecast. This is our main forecast screen. And what I'm looking at here is a particular finished product. But even though I'm looking at a finished product here, one thing that's sort of unique about our application is it allows you to forecast at any level of the product structure. So you can forecast finished products, you can forecast raw materials, ingredients, and that nature, or you could forecast intermediates. In the case of intermediates and raw materials, the way we consume forecast is through consumption. In the case of finished goods, we consume forecast through sales. But this is a tool right now that when you're seeing, I look at this item, this happens to be a finished product, and here is my historical demand pattern. And based on that, I can apply some sort of forecasting algorithm. In my case, I've set up a trend, but we have many options. These are generally accepted forecasting algorithms, including one that's called automatic selection that will interpret past sales and calculate or determine the best fit forecasting algorithm. And from that, in my case, it determined there was a trend, and here's the forecast that's laid down. Now, these are powerful tools. Most of our companies use this. They sort of reset this process on a monthly basis, or you can do it more frequently if you want. But the other thing, and we'll move on from this, but the other thing I'd have you know here is that this process lends itself to sort of management by exception. So if I open up the system to all of the products I'm forecasting, I kind of see those on a grid. That's the way our system works. Oftentimes you see other data in the grid, and I can display all the records in sort of an Excel mode like that. And what's good, what we want you to be aware of in this case from a demand management standpoint is really I only have to look at things in this list that are somehow the system has identified as possibly sort of trending out of line from what your forecast was. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that if I saw something on this list that was out of sync with the forecast, it would be highlighted in a different color, and that's what allows you to sort of address those. Only the things that are sort of the real demand is out of sync with what the system has calculated. So these are the kinds of things you should expect in sort of a full service demand management forecast tool. All right, I'll move on from that. And now I'm going to show you another real quick thing that is an optional module in our system, but it's a very powerful tool to allow you to do general business planning. This is a workbench that is used to help us do sales and operations planning. And what it allows you to do is this kind of thing. This is data that was either unit sales or dollar sales over a period of time, at actual sales. And you bring it in here, populate this workbench. And then from this, what you can do is, let's say you're planning business for the next year. And you might want to say, we're expecting a 15% increase in sales of a particular product line. So I can do things like this. Instead of 20 or nearly $30,000 in sales, I can come in and say, no, what would happen if our sales went to $40,000? Oops, missed that. All right. When you do that, what it has done is recalculated the numbers for all the specific SKUs in there. And I'm doing this for a particular product line. I could have done it for a date period. Or I could have done it for other classifications. We have what's called a family of products, et cetera. So you can slice and dice this data any way you'd like. But what our customers get a lot of mileage on this is Once you've made sort of any kind of changes here and sort of projecting what your expected sales and sort of budget will be for on a go forward basis, you can define that and save that. And that becomes kind of a stake in the ground for analysis based on what your real sales are. So this, I'm just touching the surface here, but this is a very powerful tool to help you do what's generally called sales and operations planning. Now, let's jump into some of the details of ongoing planning and scheduling. We're going to stay a little bit at the planning level at first, because keep in mind, I'm kind of making a distinction between planning and scheduling. Planning is a little bit more mid to long term. Scheduling is near term. It's optimization, smart sequencing in the plant. This particular screen I'm going to move toward now, it's maybe not the sexiest of screens, but it's very, very powerful. What this screen allows you to do is things like this. Say, I want to look at all my customer orders. That's what CO stands for. Or I could search on all my forecasts or any of my demand types. And what the system is doing is coming back and telling me where I might be late. So this is another screen that's very sort of management by exception oriented. So, and these orders, and I have a small amount of data here for a demonstration data set, but these orders rose 2 through 9 because they're trending with 0 degree of lateness. That your master scheduler, your master planner, your plant manager doesn't have anything to worry about. But this order is trending late. And here's an important distinction, folks. It's not late because it was supposed to ship yesterday and hasn't shipped. It's late because it's supposed to ship on the 30th, and the system thinks it's projecting to ship on the 8th, May 8th. So this is another tool that allows you to sort of get out in front of things. Now, in order for something like this to work, you have to have good data. Any ERP system has data requirements. The better the data you get, the more utility you get out of the system. But in this case, the system is nicely identifying areas where you may have to do some remedy, some work in order to fix problems. The other thing is, if I just click this little button up here, again, this is the same order I looked at before. It's telling me my problem because that is what's called on the critical path. This is an ingredient that's causing lateness. And the idea is maybe if I could expedite this or find another supplier, I might be able to solve not only the problems on this order, but maybe on some other orders as well. So again, this is another management by exception kind of thing. And when you think about that, instead of necessarily, imagine you had many orders that are trending late, it's good also to note you might have some tools that help you sort of aggregate what these problems might be. So that's where I'm going to go over to this screen. It says material bottlenecks. And what this allows me to do is say, okay, in a classification, what we call planner code, I want to see everything in this particular planner code that might be constraining production. These are materials that are purchased. So that's either packaging supplies, ingredients. If you're in the chemical world, these are chemical components. But just by virtue of saying, hey, I want to look at anything that's in this family or planner of materials, and I hit my little go button there, the system is telling me these are all the demands, and some of those are sort of just make to stock production runs, but this is one that's a production run that's targeted for a particular customer. But again, I'll say it one more time. This is sort of management by exception because the system is essentially telling you this particular vegetable oil is the lack of its availability is creating problems in these three situations. But again, you're only sort of addressing things that might be problematic. We have a similar screen that has to do with plant resources, plant capacity, work centers, if you will. I won't go into the details there, but it's a screen called Bottlenecks, and where I can identify a particular work center or what we call resources, and then the system will indicate all of the work that's being held up by the bottleneck in that particular area of your plant. And great little tool to help you identify problem areas. Again, management by exception. Now, I mentioned to you early in the demonstration that we have a built-in simulation tool in the system. And this is actually compelling functionality. What this allows you to do is, you note, I'm looking at alternative zero. Alternative zero means my live production database. And by that, I mean my live inventory, my live batch production orders, my live purchase orders, etc., my order book. That's all part of alternative 0. But remember, in alternative 0, this particular order is late. Now, I won't go through the mechanics of this, but of how you populate what are called alternatives, simulation alternatives. But I can have simulation alternatives, and I'm switching to alternative 1. And what you're going to see is that order for dot foods, there it is, in alternative 0, it's no longer late. And the reason is I simulated an expedited delivery of that vegetable oil. And that is then telling me I've been able to solve that problem. In fact, I made it in other situations, I may have solved lateness on 7 different orders. And this is not just related to ingredients and packaging and chemical components. It has to do with plant capacity as well. So all those things are available in our, you can address all those in our simulator tool. It's called what if analysis. Now, let's talk about that a little bit more. Let's talk about, let's switch our focus a little bit to capacity management, and we'll move into detailed scheduling. In our system, the concept of a work center, it exists in our system, but really what we use is something called resource groups and resources. Okay, here, let me show you a quick little, the way this plays out is this, and this is a great model for lots of companies, lots of process manufacturers. When you set up a resource group, they can be designed to schedule people or crewing, or for machinery, production lines, or other things like tooling and fixturing requirements. And this is the group level. Below that is the resource level. So if you had 3 mixing stations that were all sort of able to do the same type of work, you'd set up 3 different mixing resources, and they'd all be part of the mixing resource group. Same thing with a blending line or a packaging line. This model allows you to, when you're building up a product routing, you can indicate more than one thing that is a constraint or something that needs to be scheduled in production. It's a really robust model that a lot of our customers like because it allows them to sort of simulate what happens in the plant in the ERP system. Now, take that diagram and let's move over to here, and you can kind of see there is a packaging line resource group. And that packaging line resource group is made up of 3 different lines, because those lines assume they can all package product in roughly the same, with the same run rate, et cetera, same yield producing characteristics, et cetera. But that's part of, these 3 lines are part of that group. Now, when you get into the details of our application, you'll find out that we have a series of what are called scheduling rules that are available to deploy. So in this case, on a particular scheduling line, I could say, or this packaging line, I can do things like this, deploy rules that say, hey, I want to interpret the product that's being run, and I want to group together products that have the same sort of allergen characteristics. So what it'll do there is it'll sync those up automatically to run together to do things like minimize changeover time. And that, folks, is just one small example of a rule. This is what you might think of as a basic rule, but any product-oriented characteristics can be considered when you build these rules, okay? So that, again, that's just a sort of a simple example. Now, when I look, let's go back and look at a specific resource. So in that packaging line, I have one of the 3 lines is line 1, okay? And in our system, when you look at this, you say, well, there's line 1, here's line 2. Let's go back to line 1, and I'll see things like the ability to apply rules at the line level, at the specific resource level, and to do things like infinite or finite scheduling. I'm sure a lot of you folks know the difference there. Infinite scheduling allows workload to go beyond capacity, and companies that like to do that, they like to evaluate where they have overload and sort of manually determine where they need overtime or where they may need to outsource work. But we can also run the system in a finite mode. And you can actually run the system in sort of a hybrid, where you sort of take the principle that not everything in your plant is an absolute constraint, so you only finite schedule the things that are particular bottlenecks. But when I look at a resource in our system, okay, this is where I dictate the hours of operation. This is running 2 shifts, it could run 3 shifts, okay? But notice this is my setup for alternative 0. And in alternative 0, I'm not running any shift exceptions. Shift exceptions are things like working overtime or being down due to maintenance concerns, okay? But what you want to do, we're going to swing back to this idea of simulation. And if I come up and switch to alternative 1, I can see that maybe one of my ways of solving problems in one of my simulation environments was to consider running overtime in the month of May. So in this case, in alternative 1, I'm simulating a different sort of plant environment where I'm running Saturday overtime, or maybe I'm running a new shift. But what we're trying to convey here is the idea that you have a great model to model your capacity, but then you also have the ability to model it differently in what are called what-if simulation or alternative environments. Okay, so now let's build on that. Let's finish our discussion on a few minutes about detailed scheduling. Remember, I showed you some of the rules that are available to deploy and what companies can do. And one of the things I mentioned to you about our advanced planning and scheduling. So if I go back and look at that diagram again, remember when you're dealing with APS, the APS system, one of the things that makes it unique is it's real time and runs constantly. So that when new demand, you get a new order or you load in a new forecast, the APS system automatically starts planning that demand. It's almost like you're doing a mini MRP run on the fly. Now, the scheduling portion, that's a little bit different. In that case, what companies typically do is, and I'm going to come down here to production execution, and this is a case where companies will run a scheduling process on maybe at the beginning, 15 minutes before every shift or 15 minutes before every day. And when you run the scheduling algorithm, what it does is interprets what has been completed since the last scheduling run and then refreshes your schedule moving forward. And in our solution, the idea is if you build the rules properly and you sort of administer the system properly, much of your schedule can be automatically created by the software. So once this, and I'm not going to run it because I've already run it, but that's a little button, that's essentially runs the scheduling algorithm. Remember, the scheduling algorithm in our system is nothing more than a tool to optimize and sequence production properly through your plant, through your shop floor. Now, once that takes place, you're going to have access to tools like this. If I come over, I can look at my schedule that's properly sort of optimized in lots of different ways. One way I could come over and look at it is through a Gantt chart view, okay? So when I look at this Gantt chart, and this is just one view, we have lots of different sort of visuals of how to look at your schedule. We have many companies that are they're sort of posting this in areas of their plant. And in this case, I'm displaying multiple areas of my plant. So a packaging line, a filling station, a blending unit. And these blocks here are the work that's been introduced and properly scheduled, sequenced into these areas of my plant. And from this can either be a pure visual view, or if you're a floor supervisor or a master scheduler, you can also do things like this. You can use this for drag and drop scheduling. So if I want to move something off of packaging line 2 and push this ordered over to packaging line 3, that's what I'm doing there. I'm sort of just doing a drag and drop process, okay? So it's that easy to do. And you can do other things on a screen like this. If I wanted to highlight, there's this idea of highlights. I wanted to look at orders that are late. That's kind of a neat one there, because what that's allowing me to do is any order that's in red is been determined to be late. And there's lots of different ways you can define lateness. But in this case, I have it based on, think, whether it's 3 days past due or not, or something of that nature. That's a nice way there for you to identify lateness. And again, we're just sort of tapping the surface of what you can do on a screen like this, but this is one of our visual tools to look at a production schedule. Okay, if you like something that's a little more text-oriented, you can look at a schedule like this. All right, so in this case, I'm looking at a filling line, and here's all the batches that I'm going to be running, and down below, I see supporting information. So this batch, there's my ingredient list, there's my routing, etc. Here's any kind of relevant notes. This is a handy screen if you like to look at things in sort of a more of a row column orientation, maybe a little less visual. Now, I skipped over a couple things I want to mention briefly. Any good system should help you manage and automate to some degree order creation. And when I say order creation, in this case, I'm talking about batch production order creation. So in our case, we have a screen, a workbench screen. And what this is doing is showing you everything that's due to be released to production, along with some dates, etc. And the process in this case, think about it, the system is interpreted demand. It knows what available supplies are, etc. It sort of knows the whole resource condition. And what it's saying is these are orders that you can and should release. But in particular, this is a very useful part of our system. This ready checkbox is a capability in the system that tells you you can release that, and depending on the way you set up our system, that ready checkbox can mean different things. But for most of our customers, that means the material. And so it's, let's say it's ingredients on a mixing line. All the ingredients are readily available to start that production run. And the system has properly allocated ingredients to all the requirements, but it is determined to run this particular seasoning blend. The available ingredients are there. So a lot of our companies are just sort of pulling this up and saying, I'm only going to release what the system is telling me is ready. Again, this is a really nice tool to help you do effective, smart, automated production order release, batch production order release. Now, I skipped over some basic things in the system. Certainly, we have tools in the system like this. This is a very easy to use capacity analysis kind of screen. So look what I'm doing here. I'm saying things like, I want to look over the next 6 weeks at a particular blending line, or I could look at all of my plant resources. But in this case, I'm going to look at a plant blending line, and I'm saying over the next 6 weeks, what's my available hours, or no, what's my available hours, what's my load, and that's a simple but very useful sort of load percentage. And I can use this in a management by exception way as well, because I can say maybe only show me situations where I'm overloaded by 10%, or I'm loaded up to 90%. So this is, again, nice and easy to use. And one of the things a lot of our customers like about this is I can drill into levels of detail. If I click this little button that says load profile, what this is giving me sort of a visual depiction of that load and sort of another sort of a Gantt or bar chart kind of thing. And in this case, it's kind of hard to see over here, but you kind of see the nature of the load is also indicated. Scheduled load, and that means work that's already out in the plant, and it's already sort of been released for production. Whereas you also see planned load. That might be the load from forecasts, or no, from orders that you have not yet committed to production. And then you see separate load for forecasts as well. So the point here is there's lots of nice ways to sort of slice and dice what you're looking at from a capacity and load standpoint. Okay, the last thing I'm going to mention to you, and then we'll wrap up, is the whole time I've been in the system, I've been sort of working in the ERP proper, the main part of the ERP system. So all these tools I show you are part of the CloudSuite ERP application. There is also a plant application that we can touch on briefly. Let me get to that. And the reason I was showing you this is also a lot of our food and beverage and chemical companies particularly like the things I'm about to show you here. Imagine I'm a plant operator. I mean, an operator, or maybe I'm a plant supervisor. And what I can do is I can come over here and I'm going to clock in. So this is our plant application. It's called Factory Track. And it's the kind of thing that allows me to do things like basic time and attendance. So I can clock in and clock out. And I can use this, you can use this as your source to generate your payroll hours. And you could use our payroll system, or you could use our interfaces to other payroll systems like ADP. But the point is, it can be used for hours accumulation. And we have a supervisory monitoring tool to help you determine who showed up to work and who hasn't. But there's a time and attendance element. There's also a material element that allows you to record consumption of materials in a batch run, or the movement of materials from one step in production, maybe from mixing to filling. That's what all these little buttons do. And what I'm going to briefly show you here, Don, is in the labor area, and you can run this in lots of different ways. Let's say this is an operator that's been assigned to a particular mixing station, okay? When he or she hits this work center button and then just clicks over on the list, what that person is seeing is a list of all orders that have been queued up for them to work on. And what's handy about this is, certainly I can pick from the list. And if I hit things like start run, that means I'm clocking on and I'm starting to accumulate my time against a particular batch, all right? But I can also do things like this. If you're interested in paperless manufacturing, I can do things like this. I can hit the notes button and see any and all relevant notes. Or how about this? If I come back and say, show me the documents, one of the things I should have and could have done at the beginning of the presentation is our application comes with a document management system that allows you to store and propagate and revision control any and all things related to document management. And related to that is, if you want to move paperless, what I've done here is on this particular production order, something associated with that particular item or product or SKU, there is a document, and all I'm doing at this point is I'm sort of electronically opening the document, because maybe these are my mixing instructions. Okay, so what we're getting at here is this is a tool that allows your folks on the plant floor to sort of see what's the work that's queued up for them, and then see relevant information, things like attachments. And you're only really limited here by any kind of attachment, even things like videos can be displayed. So what I did there in the last few minutes was just give you a real brief overview of a plant application that's also available with the Infor CloudSuite ERP system.